She didn't pull a trigger. She didn't raise a weapon. She didn't stand over anyone with malice in her eyes. But a California prosecutor looked a jury in the eye and said, "She killed someone," and the jury agreed. What happened in Ventura County didn't just send one woman to prison, it changed the law, it changed the conversation. And for one grieving family, it finally gave a name to what had been happening to American families for decades. Not a tragedy, not an accident, a killing. This is the story of People v. Charity Faith Wiley, and nothing about it is simple. To understand why this case mattered, you have to understand what fentanyl actually is, not in the abstract, not as a statistic. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid roughly 100 times more potent than morphine. A lethal dose is measured in micrograms. Specks so small they're invisible to the naked eye. A few grains of salt's worth can stop a human heart. It was developed for surgical anesthesia, for end-stage cancer pain, for people who needed something so powerful that nothing else would work. It was never meant to be sold in Ziploc bags on street corners. It was never meant to be cut into counterfeit pills pressed to look like Xanax or Percocet. And it was never meant to end up in someone's system in a residential neighborhood in Reshape, California, while the person who sold it walked away. But that is exactly what happened. The victim in this case was not a faceless overdose statistic. They were a real person. Someone with a history, a family, people who loved them and waited for them to come home. Fentanyl doesn't discriminate. It has claimed people from every background, every zip code, every tax bracket. The opioid crisis has a way of making everyone look the same in the end. Grieving families standing in hospital hallways, or worse, getting phone calls in the middle of the night that permanently divide their lives into before and after. In Ventura County, that call came, and the family who received it made a decision that would ripple through the American justice system. They didn't accept the word overdose. They pushed. They demanded answers. They wanted to know not just what killed their loved one, but who. Law enforcement investigated. What they found led them to Charity Faith Wiley. Wiley had sold fentanyl to the victim. The transaction was documented, the drug was traced, the cause of death was confirmed. And when Ventura County District Attorney Eric Nasarenko's office reviewed the evidence, they made a choice that prosecutors across California had largely avoided making. They filed murder charges, not drug distribution charges, not manslaughter, murder, second-degree murder. The legal theory wasn't new, but its application was seismic. In California, second-degree murder requires what's known as implied malice, a conscious disregard for human life. The prosecution's argument was direct. If you sell fentanyl in 2024, you know what fentanyl does, you know the death rate, you know the potency, you know the risk. Selling it anyway, handing it to another human being and taking money for it, constitutes a conscious disregard for that person's life. That is not an accident. That is not a mistake. That is murder. Defense attorneys pushed back hard. The argument on the other side was equally straightforward. The victim made a choice. They chose to use. They knew the risks. A dealer selling drugs is not the same as a killer pulling a trigger. Charging someone with murder for a drug transaction, the defense argued, criminalizes poverty, addiction infrastructure, and a social ecosystem the law cannot simply prosecute its way out of. These are real arguments. They deserve to be heard. The tension between personal responsibility and supplier accountability sits at the heart of every overdose prosecution in America, and courts have wrestled with it for years. But Ventura County said, "We're not retreating from this." The trial moved forward. Prosecutors laid out their case with the kind of methodical precision that murder trials demand. They traced the fentanyl from Wiley to the victim. They established the deal. They put expert witnesses on the stand to explain exactly how fentanyl kills, the respiratory depression, the progressive shutdown, the way it works so fast that many victims never regain consciousness. They asked the jury to look at the facts and call them what they were. There was no mystery about the cause of death. There was no question about who provided the drug. The question was whether the law could and should hold that person responsible for the death that followed. The jury deliberated, and then they came back. Guilty. Second-degree murder. The verdict landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples moved outward immediately. Legal scholars began analyzing the implications. Defense organizations flagged it as a dangerous expansion of homicide law. victims' families across the country exhaled something that might have been relief, or validation, or simply the satisfaction of seeing the law catch up to the reality they had been living. Charity Faith Wiley was convicted of murder, not drug trafficking, not distribution, murder. In 2025, sentencing followed. The weight of that word, murder, now attached permanently to what had happened. For the family of the victim, it was the moment the legal system finally reflected the truth they had known from the beginning. Their loved one was not the author of their own death alone. Someone handed them the thing that killed them. Someone profited. Someone walked away, at least for a while, and left a body behind. California's legal landscape shifted. Prosecutors began looking at this case as a blueprint. The Ventura County DA's office had done what many had considered too legally risky, too philosophically contested, too politically complicated. They had taken it to trial. They had won. And now other counties, other states, other prosecutors sitting across the country with similar case files on their desks had a precedent to point to. This is how legal history gets made. Not always through sweeping Supreme Court decisions or landmark legislation. Sometimes it happens in a courtroom in Southern California, with 12 jurors and a prosecutor willing to call a drug deal what the evidence says it was. Critics of this approach are not wrong to raise concerns. Mass incarceration is a documented catastrophe in this country. The war on drugs has destroyed communities, disproportionately targeted people of color, and filled prisons with people who needed treatment instead of sentences. These are truths that exist alongside this verdict, not in opposition to it. The criminal justice system is not the only answer to the opioid crisis. It may not even be the primary one. But the question this case forced America to ask was a different one. When someone knowingly sells a substance with a documented kill rate, when they take money in exchange for something that kills people with terrifying regularity, at what point does the law treat that transaction as lethal? Fentanyl is not marijuana. It is not heroin from 20 years ago. It is a chemical weapon in the hands of street-level distribution networks that care nothing about the bodies they leave behind. The people who sell it are not naive about what it does. The death toll is public. The overdose data is everywhere. When Charity Faith Wiley handed over that fentanyl, she was not operating in ignorance. The jury saw it that way. The verdict reflects that. For the family of the victim, the trial was not a celebration. Grief does not end with a conviction. The person they lost does not return because justice was served. Courtrooms cannot restore what fentanyl took. What a verdict can do is tell the truth, loudly, officially on the record, about how that person died and who bears responsibility for it. Their loved one's name will not be spoken here. That is their name to keep, their story to carry, their loss to hold. What can be said is that their refusal to accept a quiet, unchallenged death helped make legal history. Their willingness to push, to demand accountability, to sit through a murder trial and face the person who sold their family member a lethal dose, that took a kind of courage that the law rarely acknowledges and the public rarely sees. The opioid crisis has claimed hundreds of thousands of American lives. The numbers are so large they stop feeling